Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 10 most disturbing true Alaskan encounter horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
I spent 2 long seasons in the mining fields outside Fairbanks. A man doesn't volunteer for the camps unless he's hungry for money, maybe for adventure or just for a way out of his own shadow. For me, it wasn't gold fever, but debt. I needed cash quick, and the mines promised steady pay. The work was backbreaking, nights colder than the grave, and the wilderness itself whispered like it didn't want us there. Still, a dollar's a dollar. Our camp squatted near an old shack, something left behind by the stampeders of the 1900s. The bosses didn't tear it down, said it wasn't worth the trouble. It leaned like a broken jawbone across the shallow creek, a skeleton of logs and rusted tin. A few of us joked that it looked like the woods were slowly swallowing it, which was fine. We never set foot inside. Every man knew the stories. Miners had gone hungry there a century back, their faces frozen into masks of despair when the gold thinned out. Places like that carry a residue. You can feel it when the wind slides under your skin, one night late. In September, frost biting at every edge of the world, I was outside finishing my shift logs when my eye caught something impossible. The shack across the creek wasn't dark anymore. A glow leaked through the ribs of the boards, faint at first, then steady. A lantern's glow-warm and golden dot now. No one had business in that shack. It was condemned. Our gear, our bunks, even the extra storage, all of that was on our side of the creek. The bosses were clear. Step foot inside that shack and you'd be off the payroll. I thought maybe another worker had gotten curious or one of the locals had wandered and drunk. But the light moved, side to side, back and forth, like someone pacing with it. I told Jared, who was nearest. He squinted across, spat into the slush, and said, "Ain't nobody in there." Roofs caved in clean through the back. A person couldn't walk without falling straight to hell. His face was stone, but his eyes gave him away. He saw it too. That yellow glassy flame waving gently in the night. We stood there until our breaths froze out of rhythm, neither of us blinking. The shack's windows flashed once more and went dark. My gut told me to forget it. But the mind doesn't operate that way in the camps. A mystery is like a splinter. Hurts more if you don't dig it out, and so I made the decision that split one life into two the life before I crossed that creek, and the life after crossing that footbridge felt like walking straight into my own grave. The planks were slick with ice, water hissing black beneath them. My boots tapped each step like a countdown. Behind me Jared muttered I was a fool and refused to follow. Maybe he was the smart one. The shack greeted me with a smell of mushrooms and rust, the stink of places wet for too long. My flashlight beam picked out splinters like bones in the walls. Everything sagged with age, collapsed shelves, a busted stove, shifting patches of black mold, but no lantern. No man either. Just silence so loud it pressed like a hand against my ears. That's when the footsteps started, heavy, slow, deliberate first. I thought my mind was bouncing echoes of my own movements. I froze to test it. The boards still creaked. One dragging step followed by another. That weight it carried decades. Whatever wore those boots belonged deeper than the ground beneath my feet. My being caught on words carved into the timber planks. Lines slashed again and again like someone locked in had tried to claw their way out with a penknife. Words repeated over and over, below me. Cold below me, and stranger yet, the hands won't let go. Hundreds of marks scratched over one another. Desperate and deranged, a rush of air blew against my neck warm, smelling like burnt lamp oil. I spun. For half a heartbeat, light flooded my vision. Not my flashlight. A miner stood there, not 2 feet away. His gear was older than any man's still working wool coat, cracked boots, helmet half caved in. His beard was stiff with ice, though my breath melted before me. His cheeks hollowed into shadow, but his eyes were fire, embers glowing from sunken sockets. And in his left hand, the thing that shouldn't exist, a brass lantern burning full, glass long since shattered around it, I blinked, and with that blink, the light vanished. The room fell black. Panic chewed through me like machinery. Something thundered across the floorboards, charging. I moved without thought, scrambling for the door. The shack groaned in protest, and for every step I made, heavy boots slapped behind me, closer, faster. My flashlight spun wild, catching hollow shelves, collapsing like they were clawing for my legs. The night beyond was nothing but stars meant freedom. I dove for them. The bridge nearly split in half when my boots slammed across. Water splashed up where the ice cracked. My lungs screamed as I stumbled into the safety of our bunkhouse. Light, tripping face first into a scatter of men who came rushing at the noise. "What in God's name's after you?" Jared barked, pulling me up by the collar. I tried speaking, but words caught. Finally, I choked. "Lantern." He had the lantern. The bunkhouse went silent as a churchyard. Every last one of them knew what lantern I meant, though not one spoke it aloud at first. Then Jared muttered like a confession. "Saw it myself." "Last season," his voice cracked, and suddenly the laughter others mustered was thin as paper. When I described him, the boots, the breath, those burning eyes, they shifted uneasy, some crossing themselves, though most were not Christian men. One shoved his pack toward the corner like moving space between himself and the shack might buy safety. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every time a board creaked, my pulse jack hammered. Days passed. Work consumed us as always, sluice lines, frozen pans, and the endless song of steel on stone. But the fear didn't fade. See, once you've glimpsed something still working long past when it should have rotted away, your world tilts. Nothing looks as solid as before, not even the ground you sleep on. Others had seen him more than I realized. The stories flowed like miners swap ghost tales over coffee. Walking back alone, lantern glimmering between cabins, or got shined on straight through the window like he was searching. Inside, and one terrible account, a man swore he woke with the lantern in his room, flame bending low above his head, though the scent and scratch marks on his wall proved he wasn't dreaming. He quit the next day, hiked straight out with frost nipping his ears. Eventually the bosses sealed the shack. They tore down its ribs with heavy machines, claiming insurance reasons. Still, that didn't end it. The creekside remained bare, but some nights a glimmer would bleed through the trees where the shack had been, as though the miner still walked his patrol, blind to time. For me, the image never left. I'd close my eyes and smell kerosene, hear the slam of endless boots behind me. The lantern wasn't just a trick of light, it was a man. A man ripped so deep into his misery he couldn't let go even in death. Gold can feed you or starve you, but his hunger had become eternal. And if you ever see that glow swaying out there in the bush, remember this: you don't follow. You never follow. Because once you step into his light, you're walking on borrowed time. I worked 2 long mining seasons out beyond Fairbanks, and if there's one thing you learn up there, it's that the wilderness remembers everything. Men think they tame the land with picks and sluice boxes, but the land just waits. Some things buried in Alaskan soil aren't meant to be dug up again. Our camp sat in a valley ringed by fir and spruce, with a milky creek cutting right through the middle. On our side were the bunkhouses, scrap-built cook tent, and the equipment. Across the creek sat something older, an abandoned stampeder's shack left to rot. Since the early 1900s, it leaned to one side, walls darkened with moss, a skeleton ribcage of logs. Everyone avoided it, and the bosses said flatly, "Don't step foot in there. Roof will kill you." But in the north, rules don't stop curiosity, especially when the nights stretch on forever. The first time I noticed something strange about the shack was a September evening, cold enough you could taste frost in your teeth. I was outside checking sluice lines before bedding down when I caught a flicker of yellow across the creek. At first, I thought the moonlight was playing tricks. Then I saw it clear, a lantern glow, bobbing back and forth inside the shack like someone walking circles with it, I told Jared. Another hand working beside me, and he frowned deep. "Ain't nobody in there. You step wrong through that floor, you're finished. Whole back wall's gone." But he kept his eyes fixed on that light the same way I did. Breathing shallow, the glow wasn't just steady, it moved. Like somebody pacing, pausing, turning, then pacing again. We stood frozen watching it, both too stubborn to admit we were rattled. After maybe a full minute, the light blinked out, snuffed like breath on glass. I tried to shrug it off, but that image clawed under my skin, a lantern swaying where no man should be. That shack was condemned. Nothing living could wander inside without crashing straight through rotten timber. Yet there it was. Jared muttered one final warning, said I'd be insane to poke around. But in camp life, mysteries become poison if you ignore them. A glowing light where there shouldn't be one. It gnawed at me until my head felt heavier than my stomach, and so, by the time midnight crept across the trees, I had made my choice. I'd cross that footbridge. I had to see for myself who or what was holding that light. The footbridge creaked under me as I crossed into silence. The current below gnawed at ice, glinting silver beneath thin crusts. Every step forward sounded too heavy, like my boots knew something I didn't. Single quotes. Inside, the air pressed damp and sour. My flashlight beam shook across half-sunken shelves and snapped bed frames. Everything sagged like it had been asleep for a century and didn't want waking. There was no lantern, no glow. Only the low moan of wind scraping holes in the roof. And then the footsteps started. At first, I thought it was just my own weight echoing. I froze to check. That's when I heard them again, deliberate, dragging steps moving across the floorboards behind me, one, then another. And again I swung my light. The room was empty except for something at my left. My beam caught a wall carved and scored with hundreds of scratches. Some words cut over and over, rough gouged letters. Below me, cold below me, hands keep reaching. Some of the phrases sat layered on top of each other, like they'd been carved night after night by someone who wasn't leaving. A chill licked down my back, and then the air shifted, warm, acrid, the unmistakable smell of kerosene. A glow bloomed at the far end of the shack. I turned and saw him. He was no living miner. His coat hung stiff with frost, his boots cracked wide, his helmet dented sideways like it had been smashed. His beard was ice stiff, but his eyes burned. Deep orange red, not human at all. In his hand he carried an old lantern, glass shattered, but flame inside flickered steady. Too bright, too hungry, I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. I blinked once and the glow vanished, gone, then the sound came, shuddering toward me, the slam of boots across wood, faster than any man could run. My flashlight swung wild, lighting collapse and rot rushing closer. Something tore after me, and each step groaned so heavy it felt like the whole earth would cave. I bolted. Words sawed in my head, below me, hands, cold below me. The shack howled as if it wanted to drag me into itself. When I burst back into open air, I didn't care if the bridge cracked beneath me. I just ran until the bunkhouse lights crowned me in safety. I wasn't alone when I returned to that room. Something had followed me, and I knew it. I swore I could still hear boots fading into the trees long after I fell. Against the doorway, panting, the other men surrounded me, half mock, half concern. Jared asked if I was touched in the head. But when I stammered out what I'd seen, the boots, the burning eyes, the lantern, that smell of kerosene, something in his face cracked. He looked down, jaw tight, then muttered almost too soft, "I saw him last year." The bunkhouse fell into silence. Every single man shifted uneasily. No laughter. They knew. Some admitted it outright sightings of a glow drifting between windows, lantern beams streaking across cabin walls when no hand carried it. One man claimed he'd turned to his bunk and saw flames hovering above him in the dark, whispering like someone wanted him below. He left the next morning, face gone pale like flour. The shack got torn down eventually. The bosses decided insurance was worth more than superstition. But even after it collapsed into splinters, the lantern wasn't finished. Week after week, men working night shifts swore they spotted a faint light bobbing along the empty shoreline where the old wood once stood. For me, it never ended. Even off duty, even years later, sometimes I smell that faint kerosene breath in the air when no lamp is lit. Sometimes I wake in blackness, certain. I hear the slam of boots pacing circles around my bed. Alaska fades under your skin, but some shadows calcify into bone. The worst part wasn't seeing him. It wasn't even the chase. It was the look in those burned-out eyes. He wasn't hunting me. He wasn't angry. He was searching. Searching for something he'd lost long before I was born, some final weight of hunger buried beneath the floorboards. Maybe it was gold. Maybe it was the bodies of the men he watched die. All I know is that the search never stopped, and neither did the light, even today. Workers traveling the North Roads tell me the story still lives. They swear a lantern burns sometimes above creek beds or in the distance of old collapsed valleys. No matter how much snow buries the sights, that glow sways slow and steady dot, so here's my truth. If you see a lantern flame on an Alaskan night where no man should be walking, don't cross the bridge like I did. Don't try to solve it. Because once you step inside his darkness, that miner knows your face. And like the flames in his eyes, he'll never let the memory of you go. During my time in the North Slope mining camps, I came to understand that people aren't really in charge of the land they're tenants of what the ground allows. The permafrost, that endless sheet of frozen soil stretching deeper than any of us can drill, has been locking secrets away for thousands of years. Some are bones of animals bigger than trucks. Some are things far less natural. One winter, I worked at a makeshift camp not far from Circle. It was late October, with the daylight trimming shorter by the hour, and the bosses were desperate to get one last excavation in before the ground became too hard to dig. We were exploring a pit near the riverbed, clearing permafrost layers with picks and heaters. And that's where it happened. It began when a young worker named Elias struck something with his pick. The sound was sharp and hollow, not the dull thud you expect when you hit frozen dirt. He crouched down, scraping away, and uncovered what looked like a shaft, a void cut right beneath us. It wasn't on any old mining maps, and the bosses grinned like devils. Hollow spaces meant potential veins trapped untouched. They set up heaters along the frost wall to soften it, so we could carve further down. That night, as the heaters moaned, I lay awake listening to the new haunting sound crossing through camp, a low, drawn-out groan echoing from the pit. At first, I wrote it off as wind shifting through cracks. The North is full of strange howls, and you learn not to scare easy, but the groan rose higher, lilting like a voice being pulled tight by pain. Elias heard it too. He staggered into the bunk one night, face pale in lantern light, and swore he heard a scream echoing up the shaft when the heaters pulsed. I told him his ears were playing tricks. He just hissed back, "I know what screaming sounds like." The next morning, frost coated my blanket, though I slept indoors by the stove. When I walked outside, the heaters had shut off. Frozen solid, men huddled around, whispering. No one wanted to speak what we all felt. The permafrost wasn't just cracking. It was wailing. That day, when the bosses forced the machines back on, every man went stiff. Because below the crunch of thawing soil came a distinct, chilling cry. Wordless but human. Gravel and ice singing like lungs begging for air. We weren't digging through ground. We were cracking open a tomb. Over the next 2 days, the sounds grew louder. At first, distant cries, riding whispers. Over time, they sharpened, high-pitched, full-throated screams lasting seconds at a time. Not just one voice, but a chorus. Work slowed. Some dropped tools outright. Every strike with a pickaxe felt wrong, like hitting a coffin's lid. Still, the bosses barked, telling us we were just stirring methane pockets or loosening rock. "Air whistles when it escapes," one said. But no man with 2 ears could mistake those sounds for air. On the third night, I drew second watch near the pit. The moon sat pale, casting the excavation hole into a black mouth swallowing the earth. Wind hummed, and then, without warning, a jagged shriek clawed its way up through the frost, sharp enough to make my teeth ache. I staggered back, heart lurching. It wasn't just noise, it was emotion, raw and suffocating, then more joined. Different tones, overlapping like suffering harmonies. Some long, some guttural, some short and punctured. My knees nearly gave when I realized there were children's pitches among them. Deep human voices and high ones layered, endless. Elias came running when he heard me shouting. He leaned over the pit and whispered, "They've been here all along." His face looked hollow, like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. I snapped at him to pull back, but he was transfixed. He swore he could hear words under the screams foreign. guttural syllables piercing like broken glass. When I dragged him away, he fought me, wild-eyed. Said they were calling names. Said he heard his mother's voice crying for him. By morning, 2 workers were gone. Their bunks were empty, no footprints leading out into the snow, no signs of struggle. Just gone. The bosses tried to claim they'd deserted, packed out in secret to head south before the ground sealed hard for winter. But the rest of us knew better. We'd heard the camp dogs howling from dusk till dawn at the pit. We'd seen light strange, cold blue flashes crackling faintly above the shaft at night, like lightning trapped under ice. And each day the screaming lengthened. We slept with our hands over our ears, but the cries soaked through, deep into bone. By then, no amount of gold kept men steady. One hinted we ought to backfill the shaft immediately. Another warned it was too late. That once opened, a wound in the ground doesn't close again, and to this day I think he was right. Because the screaming didn't sound trapped. It sounded like it was climbing closer. The final night ripped every shred of doubt away. The camp was restless. Men packing quietly, ready to abandon wages just to flee. The bosses tried to lock us down, promising a gold strike if we stayed a few days longer. Their greed was louder than sense. But greed couldn't cover what tore out of the frost at sunset, when the heaters blared and metal chiseled ice. The shaft didn't just echo screams this time, it exhaled them. The sound shot out in one hideous suction, a roar of dozens, hundreds howling in layered agony. Men dropped tools, some fell to their knees, others ran blind in the snow. I clung to the earth as the air vibrated, and then silence. Real silence. We thought maybe it had burned itself out. Then the cracking began. Loud, deep fissures ripping across the ice shelf like thunder underfoot. The pit walls shook. One heater toppled in. Men scrambled back, but Elias stayed, staring down like something was beckoning him. His lips moved in whispers I couldn't catch, before I could grab him. Elias stepped into the shaft. The ground groaned as if pleased. His body dropped and vanished into the dark. The pit roared alive, a shriek so powerful it shredded my eardrums with pain. The frost itself glowed faint lines of light spidering through ice as though thousands of hands pressed upward from below. Shapes struggling, writhing, we fled. No more talk of wages. No more camp orders. Every man left the place behind, scattering south. Some swore they heard the screaming follow us through the trees for miles. Some claimed they saw shadows move beneath the frozen river, quick as eels twisting under the ice. I've asked questions since then. Dug through history of old expeditions, native accounts, whispered folklore. The consensus is clear. The earth remembers everybody it swallows. In a place like Alaska, where avalanches and starvation claimed thousands during the gold rush, the permafrost is less a graveyard and more a prison. And sometimes, the locks fail. I never set foot near Circle again. Men who stayed on that contract suffered accidents strange and brutal. No one ever found Elias, though months later hunters claimed they heard a man crying out the exact words Elias spoke before stepping into the pit, his voice echoing beneath the frozen soil. Whenever I close my eyes, I hear that symphony of screams rising in the earth. They weren't just noise. They were promises, warnings, and one day, as the ice thaws more and more across this planet, I fear the ground won't be strong enough to hold them anymore, because if that permafrost ever truly melts, every one of those trapped voices will be free again. I worked the winter season outside of Circle, Alaska lands where the ground stays frozen year-round, thick with permafrost that feels closer to stone than soil. Folks don't know real silence until they've stood over a pit in that endless white expanse, with only the grind of tools and the sting of wind to remind you you're still breathing. That season carried something different, though, and I'll never forget what the permafrost let loose. Our project was simple. Clear an exploratory pit before freeze-up stopped us for the year. The bosses wanted one last chance to prove there was gold in those veins. We had only weeks before the soil hardened too much to cut into. Work rotated between picks, jackhammers, and heaters, a brutal combination of heat-pounding ice and cold clawing at skin. On the 4th day, a fellow named Elias drove his pick down and struck something hollow. The noise made every man pause. It wasn't metal, wasn't dirt. It rang sharp and empty like cutting into a drum. He scraped the layers back and revealed what looked like an underground shaft, wooden beams half rotted. An old tunnel we'd never known was there. My gut turned right then because Alaska is stuffed with forgotten mine shafts, graves hidden under snow, and traps carved by dead men's ambitions. The bosses grinned wide, though. To them, finding hidden passages was fortune, not danger. They set heaters along the frost wall to melt deeper and carve an opening. That night, as the machines droned, I swore the frost itself moaned back. A deep, keening note drifting up from the dark below. At first, I blamed fatigue. Working 15 hours a day makes your ears invent things. But Elias heard it too. He came into the bunkhouse shaking, swearing he'd heard a scream when he leaned close to the shaft. He wasn't laughing, his eyes wide, his voice tight. I told him the ice can carry strange echoes, but even as I said it, unease pulled at my own stomach. By the next night, the noises sharpened. Wind whistled, but beneath it layered faint cries, long, hollow, rising like steam from underground. A couple men pretended it was coyotes trapped under the snowpack. But every one of us knew no animal sounded that human. And in that moment, I realized the ice wasn't just holding age-old soil. It was holding something left behind. Something that screamed against the cold it had been frozen into. We weren't digging toward gold. We were digging straight into a graveyard of voices. The longer we worked the pit, the louder it got. First it was indistinct groans on the wind. Over days, the timbre shifted sharper, jagged tones too close to human suffering to deny. And worse, it wasn't one voice anymore. It was many, some rose in gasps, others in long, anguished howls. Once, while clearing ice, I dropped my pick and held my breath. That's when I noticed pitches. Low rumbling bellows and high keen wails overlapping like some horrible choir that never drew a breath. Every man near the pit froze in place, picks mid-air, faces drained colorless. The bosses still called it air vents releasing. Pressure, they said. Frozen methane cracking free could whistle like a shriek. But methane doesn't call names. That's what shook me worst. Elias swore he heard his mother's voice, clear as a bell, buried in the noise. Another man, Robson, backed away pale as snow, muttering he'd just heard his child crying beneath his boots. Neither of them had seen their families in years. The longer we lingered, the more the sounds twisted into syllables. Strange, choking syllables that didn't belong to English or anything familiar like guttural chants. Pressed through soil. Those days blurred together with dread. At night, dogs tethered near camp barked and yelped without pause. They clawed at the snow, trying to run. One broke free and bolted so far into the white we never saw it again. Then men began to disappear too. First was Holt, who vanished from bedroll without tracks leading out. His gloves, boots, even coat stayed behind, but he was gone. The bosses claimed he'd snapped from stress and wandered off, but in -30, no man walks barefoot across frost unless something pulls him. The following night, 2 more workers swore they saw shapes writhing under the thin crust of ice in the pit wall, as if bodies pressed upward, mouths opening to scream but never breaching surface. They quit next morning, hiked into town, swearing never to mine again. By then, the shaft itself had become a wound. Frost cracked louder each hour, as though the earth strained to vomit something out. The screaming lasted longer, less like echo and more like a chorus clawing upward. Every time the heaters kicked on, the sound would spike into agonized peaks before settling to a rumble, and I knew then. The noise wasn't air escaping the ground. It was something alive being forced closer to us. The frozen earth didn't want us to keep going. It wanted us gone. Still, greed deafened the bosses. And that greed lit the fuse for what came next. The final day in that camp snapped every last thread of doubt we'd been told to blast away. Deeper ice so equipment could reach. Black powder charges lined across the edge of the shaft, each one hissing with timed fuses. I remember the silence before ignition, the still weight of air holding its breath like the forest was waiting too. Then the ground lurched. Explosions cracked through permafrost, and the shaft split open wide. What came wasn't rockfall. It was a roar. The hole bellowed like a lung collapsing. The temperature dropped sharply, colder than the surrounding air, as if the earth's core exhaled ice. Men staggered back as from inside that yawning pit, a symphony of screams raged all at once. Stronger, louder, more distinct than anything prior. Deep bellows, shrieking hysteria, guttural chants, children's voices all shrieking in layered waves, enough to shake ribs in our chests. Then came movement. I swear under my life. Pale forms pressed against the pit walls, outlines of arms and faces surging in translucent frost. Hands clawed upward, mouths opening in eternal rage. The ground shuddered with each cry. Dogs tore their collars to flee. One man vomited blood from the sheer pressure of sound. Elias stood frozen at the edge, eyes locked downward. They won out, he whispered, voice flat. He leaned forward, entranced like something pulled his balance. I caught his arm, but he fought me, wild, whispering that his mother was in there, begging his help. His tears froze against his cheeks, and then it ended. Screams cut off in an instant. Silence heavier than stone fell. Only faint crackling of permafrost shifting under its weight remained. But emptiness is worse than noise because it meant whatever was down there was listening. That night, we scattered. No man stayed. I marched until my feet bled, through waste, high drifts, refusing to sleep for fear of hearing their voices again. Behind me on the wind, I swore faint crying still echoed across the valley. No one speaks of that pit now. The bosses sealed the report, claimed the explosion compromised ground. Nothing more. But every winter, hunters passing near circle say they hear its still thin weeping beneath their campfires, rising from frozen rivers at night. One swore the ice cracked open mid-storm and voices howled until snow buried the wound again. I pray I never hear it again. But sometimes in dreams I do. And worse, spring thaw creeps further every year. The permafrost is dwindling. Cracks run deeper. One day, that ground won't hold them anymore. And when it bursts open fully, when the last of the ice melts, the world will learn what Alaska has been burying for centuries. I've spent most of my years chasing pay dirt across Alaska, and I tell you plain, miners don't scare easy. We've got enough to worry about with frostbite, gas pockets, and cave-ins, so ghost stories usually bounce off us like snow off tin. But every now and then the earth coughs up more than gold, and what you uncover is heavier than any ore. That's what happened the season we set camp near an abandoned storehouse west of Nome. The place looked like it had been standing empty, a century, broken rafters, windows sealed with warped planks. Most of the crew ignored it, claiming the structure would collapse if a stiff wind hit. But one evening, hunting for stray scrap boards, I spotted a glint through the slats. An old clock hung on the far wall inside. At first, I thought nothing of it. Miners leave junk all over. Yet, when I glanced twice, my gut froze. That clock wasn't frozen at all, it was working. Pendulum swinging smooth, hands pointing exact to the top of the hour. No ticking sound, but steady movement, bold as daylight. Curiosity had its claws in me then. After supper I pried the boards and slipped inside. The smells clung sharp dust, leather rot, faint kerosene. The shelves sagged under a century of silence. But the clock stood bright, wood casing varnished like it had been polished yesterday. I crept closer, lantern shaking. And I froze outright. The clock face wasn't normal anymore. Instead of Roman numerals, faint scratched digits gleamed in the glass numbers falling like sand grains. 6 hours, 48 minutes, and 15 seconds. 6 hours, 48 minutes, and 14 seconds. 6 hours, 48 minutes, and 13 seconds. A countdown. Clear as day, I staggered back. No one had been inside for decades, yet the thing ticked down like it was alive. I told myself it was an odd trick of shadow or reflection. I walked out, tried to shake off the unease. The next night it plagued my mind, so I checked again. The time had dropped hours from the last I'd seen. Never paused, never slowed. And later that same night, one of the crew and operator named Keith was found frozen stiff not 30 yards from camp. No tracks revealed how he wandered, but his face was twisted like he died mid-scream. When I checked again quickly after, the clock stood at 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds, and at that precise moment, it clicked all the way back up. Reset clean, as though marking somebody else. Right then, deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't counting time. It was counting people. And Keith had just met his turn. From that moment forward, sleep abandoned me. I'd sneak into the storehouse after shifts, staring at those falling numbers with dread pumping my chest hollow, always ticking steady. Each tick cutting closer to something inevitable. I tried telling Elias, a coworker who'd shadowed a lot of my assignments. He laughed at first, then followed one night to see for himself. His smirk faded when the pendulum swayed before his eyes. Digits marked 1 hour 51 minutes and 47 seconds. They kept sliding lower while we stood there. By the time we blinked, over 2 minutes had vanished faster than real time, precise as a blade. Elias grew obsessed. He recorded digits in a notebook, whispering theories about lost miners, buried disasters, cosmic schedules. I begged him to leave it alone. You don't meddle with curses. But fascination poisons some men worse than whiskey. Meanwhile, camp deaths stacked unnaturally. Holden, our cook, dropped stiff against the storage post mid-shift. Settler Tomlin vanished from inside the bunkhouse with no sign of departure. Empty blanket beside furnace, yet gone without a single footprint in the snow. Every tragedy aligned exact with the numbers draining to zero inside that storehouse. We started eyeing each other, wondering who it had marked next. Men grew reckless, heavy drinking like they wanted to drown the dread. By week's end, some flat refused to work. The bosses chalked it up to isolation shakes, threatened docked pay. But we weren't suffering nerves. We were watching death schedule itself on a wooden clock nobody could explain. Some swore names flickered across the glass for an instant, etched faint, then gone. Elias insisted he saw his mother's name one night, written clear in fog. He begged me to confirm. I looked, but all I swore I saw was frost and scratches. Yet something inside me wondered, because I felt my chest go tight as if my name sat hidden 2 as the reader fell into single digits. Hours, not days, our camp turned toward madness. Doors slammed each time boots passed. Whispers curled across rafters in the night. Men swore faint ticking echoed through even while they tried sleeping, as if the clock's sound carried far outside its tin prison. And still Elias returned nightly, scribbling notes like scripture, waiting for the final 0 on the day Holden died. I'd noticed the clock strike reset again, instantly returning to a new countdown starting fresh. That meant the clock always chose its next mark. Always waiting. And sooner or later, that meant one of us standing there would be inside its glass. The night I'll never scrub from memory was when Elias forced me to watch the final seconds with him. He was convinced names sharpened as 0 neared. That night the countdown stood under 10 minutes. The air lodged thick in my lungs. We crouched inside the storehouse, his lantern flickering across cracked walls. The pendulum swung viciously now, faster than ever, digits flashing. 0 hours 6 minutes and 12 seconds. 0 hours 6 minutes and 11 seconds, Elias whispered frantically, notebook trembling in his hand, sure the clock was calling him. He repeated, I'll see them this time. I'll see the list. When numbers hit under 60 seconds, the air grew icy. Breath frosting inside the storehouse like mid-January, though heaters roared at camp. Boards on the wall strained, popping sharp, as though pressure crushed them outward. And faint scratching filled that room like dozens of nails scraping to climb out of the wood. 0 hours 0 minutes and 5 seconds, pendulum swayed. Groaning deep rose under the floorboards. Elias leaned in close, eyes wide unblinking, mouth curved into a fevered grin. At 0, the storehouse windows shattered inward. The pendulum froze. My lantern burst wildly. And from the bunkhouse outside came screams raw, full-throated, piercing the cold night. When we rushed out trembling, half the crew had risen to chaos. One man lay flat by the stove, face white and mouth open mid-cry, dead before his knees had hit the ground. Time of death matched the 0 mark as bell, clear as a rifle shot. Elias wouldn't leave it. Through the panic, he slipped inside again, muttering about proof etched across the glass. Nobody held him back. By dawn, he was gone too later, found stiff as stone waste deep in a snowdrift outside camp. In his hand that notebook, pages filled with scribbles all repeating one phrase. It lists us all. The storehouse boards were sealed afterward. Bosses ban mention. Yet I swear, even buried under snow, when storms swept the valley quiet, ticking still drifted through the wind, I don't go near Nome anymore. But years later, sometimes in the dead of night, I wake with numbers behind my eyes, descending faster. My pulse sinks to their rhythm. All day I can't shake the weight that maybe what Ellis wrote was true. Maybe the clock strikes well beyond our camp. Maybe it counts every single one of us toward that same final zero, and when that pendulum stills the last time, I don't think another man will breathe again to record it. I first laid eyes on the company store during a resupply haul up an old trail near Juneau. We were fortifying a small camp and needed timber, so we scouted abandoned gold rush sites nearby. Most ruins in those parts are nothing but splinter heaps under snow, but one structure stood stronger than the rest. The storehouse of a mining company long gone, the place looked impossibly well preserved for being a century old. Roof still peaked, doors intact, glass panes filmed but unbroken. Someone might have mistaken it for a cabin still in use. Except no footprints, no smoke, no signs of life in decades. The company it belonged to had gone bankrupt in 1910, leaving behind only death counts from famine and collapse. I volunteered to scout it alone while the others hauled supplies. Something about its posture nagged me like a corpse propped upright. The moment I pushed the door, winter air followed me inside. Not draft, actual freezing vapor poured out like the room breathed cold, and then I stopped in awe. Inside wasn't ruin at all. Wooden racks and shelves were stocked, each neat and full canned goods, folded wool, even polished tools gleaming faint. Dust coated nothing. It was laid out freshly, as if clerks had stepped out for lunch and would be back soon, but what clenched my stomach were the price tags. Hung on every item was a slip of thin card, stark red streaks on ivory paper. Handwriting, rough, shaky. Not ink, not pencil looked like blood. Each label bore numbers we half recognized. 15 cents in dried brown smears beside canned peaches. 40 cents scrawled along a spade handle. I pressed closer. The stains weren't imagination. They clotted around cardboard edges, some still tacky as if recent. Breath misted heavy in my throat. Then came the sound. A distant shuffle between aisles. Not the echo of my boots another step. Smoother, lighter. I called out instinctively. Hello? Camp security, anyone here? Voice cracked over shelves. Answer came as clinking glass. Faint taps like jars shifting themselves. I felt then what no rational man in Alaska wants to feel. I wasn't alone. And nothing living should have stocked that store pristine. I turned toward the door, hoping to slip out before answers came hunting. But the latch jammed stiff under my hands. Behind me, every shelf creaked softly as though settling. As though aware, I had no way out but forward. Deeper into the cold, that was when my true nightmare began. With the door frozen solid behind, I threaded aisles trembling. My lamp beam danced across labels, those streaked red smears spelling prices on every little object. Patterns emerged, sums that shouldn't exist lined sequentially. Climbing higher, though goods remained worthless trinkets, wool socks 25 cents, salt bag 60 cents. Lantern wick $1.10, yet noted beneath the larger numbers, faint shadows of lettering bled out single words. Due. Owed. Paid. That's when I recognized what chilled deeper than the air. These weren't just dollars. They were debts. I'd passed a crate of beans. Price label scrawled 4.33 Breton. My gut clenched. I knew that name. Breton had worked our crew weeks earlier but had gone missing en route during a storm. We chalked it up to frostbite. Yet here his name hung on a can of beans. Blood red and final. I yanked the tag to prove myself delusional, but it wouldn't tear. Paper stiff as hide. My hand came back sticky. Faint copper reek curling sickly in my nose. Then footsteps again, a shuffle like slippered feet dragging just out of sight. Voices layered in whispers, faint between shelves. I caught fragments. Unpaid. Collected. Worth. They hissed around me, rising then falling each time I shifted. Flashes of figures streaked in my periphery. I spun once, sweated inside my parka despite the cold. Only racks remained, but price tags wilted and wavered like they breathed. More names appeared burned faint into labels as I moved, men both alive and missing from our crews. Ellis, Robson, even my own surname Ghost, shaded across a rack of bread. I fled deeper, seeking another exit. Lantern light quaked over a counter at Hall's End. A ledger spread enormous, pages yellowed. I approached despite myself. Entries ran mile after mile of dead scrawl, listing miners by name. Goods purchased each crossed into red tally columns noting, "Due in flesh." The pencil lying beside the book was snapped, splintered tip. But ink lines across more pages weren't ink. They were darker, thicker. Like blood traced by fingertip dot when the temperature dropped steeper. Crystal bloom of frost chased across walls, sealing corners white. Whispers climbed into pressurized groans, long sighs like debtors moaning from walls themselves. I understood the cursed pattern then. Men who vanished weren't lost by storm. They'd been purchased. Their worth tallied into crimson tags. The company never collapsed. It just changed its accounting. I dropped my lamp, shaking hard. Oil sparking embers across the frozen floor. In crushing blackness, steps came closer, scales scuffing floor not human. A pressure thudded in the air with each pace, and names whispered behind my ear no one alive should know. Mine among them, blind panic drove me. I shuffled backward until the counter edge jammed my thighs. The ledger loomed in the darkness as faint glow from shelves fluttered, tags themselves buzzing. Red, like burning coal. Books have weight as physical as stone. This one radiated hunger, every page lined with debts stretching generations. I thumbed a few lines against my will. 1899, 5 men marked. Ode, 1912, cave-in collected. Over decades, names filled line after line. Entire families swallowed into its arithmetic dot, then pages cleared to blank with only one inked word at top. Current. Beneath the first name scrawled in fresh crimson. Mine. Followed by a blank line blinking faintly, as though waiting. As though daring me to sign the receipt, light grew brighter, though no lantern burned. It came from aisles where figures shimmered, faint, a mass of blurred miners, hollow-eyed, frozen faces etched in blue. They spread across shelves like display mannequins, clothes stiff with rime. When tags hissed, figures jerked once like strings pulled. Each tag anchored to one soul hung by invisible thread, the whispers unified loud into a cashier's call. Paid. Paid, paid, paid. I bolted through them, flesh brushing icy phantoms. Limbs felt dragged heavy by invisible hooks. My chest convulsed as though my very worth was being tabulated by unseen hands. By miracle, the frozen latch gave as I slammed it. The outer air, though frigid Alaskan night, felt like fire against my lungs. I sprawled outside gasping, snow swallowing me. Behind, the store lights dimmed slow, faint glow snuffed like breath leaving a candle. Whispers trailed off into silence. I never entered again. I warned every man in camp to keep clear. Some believed me, some laughed. Yet months later, more vanished without tracks. And each time, red tags fluttered loose across drifts outside the boarded door listing the same names. Always accurate. Always final. Years have passed. But I still wake nights tasting iron on my tongue. I dream shelves laden with goods, each label red, my name still blinking against bread or salt. Always waiting for collection. I move south, hundreds of miles, but objects arrive anyway. One time a note slipped under my cabin door, blank paper, with only price drawn in crimson. $7.25, due. That store is no ruin. It is an account book in wood and frost, a dead office run by ghosts of a company that never closed, and the truth I cannot outrun. Once your name stains a tag, debt is inevitable. Even if it takes a lifetime. Even if it takes death itself, they always collect. I've stood knee-deep in plenty of rivers, panning gold flakes so fine they disappeared if you blinked too slow. Water's everything to miners, our lifeline, our destroyer, sometimes our grave. It cuts the land clean and tells you where wealth hides. But one season outside of Dawson Range, I learned water tells other stories too. Stories no man should witness. Our crew had cobbled together a primitive sluice line that ran down from the hillside stream. It wasn't pretty rough timber, patched gates, but it worked. Every morning we'd feed rock and sediment, Every evening we'd watch the muddy water wash gravel clean, separating what glitters from dirt. For weeks we did fine. Grueling, freezing work, but steady returns. Then one morning a strange murk crept down our trough. Not the usual brown mud or icy silt. No, this was darker, heavier. The water thickened, sluggish. I remember leaning down confused, scooping a poundful. The stream glistened red under dawn light. At first I laughed nervously, thinking the sunrise played tricks on my eyes. But the longer we stared, the clearer it became. The sluice wasn't pouring dirt anymore. It poured blood-colored water. Nobody wanted to admit it. It's easier to call it rust or clay runoff, but when the smell hit, even the strongest men paled. Not mud, not rust. A coppery tang, sharp and unmistakable, like the inside of a butcher's bucket. Metallic, rotten, rich with the stink of blood. The more it flowed, the more my gut twisted. And then fragments rolled past. At first just flecks, bits you could mistake for wood shavings. Then shapes. Pale chips sliding along the current, knocking edges of the sluice. When one jammed against my boot, my soul nearly fled me. White, porous, a splinter of bone no bigger than 2 fingers. Others followed larger shards. Rounded curves. A row of teeth locked in gums half eaten. Everyone backed from the sluice like it burned. The bosses shouted it was some grave site upstream. Maybe old animals washed out by thaw. But Alaska's wildlife doesn't leave molars shaped human, nor marrow fragments too familiar for denial. We knew then we weren't just mining dirt anymore. We were dragging something buried. And the creek was bleeding it out through our own sluice line. Part 2, Bones from the Hillside. Approximately 465 words. No man wanted to touch that sluice after. We stood spitting prayers, muttering curses, anything to push courage back into dead lungs. But the bosses didn't scare easy. Gold fever breaks men worse than any ghost. They demanded we keep feeding the line blood or not. So we did. Against everything our insides screamed, we shoveled more dirt upstream. And with every batch we fed in, the sluice vomited up worse. Not just fragments, but near complete remains. A child-sized ribcage washed forward, bones clattering against boards until snapped apart in current. A jaw rolled end over end, teeth clicking like dice. The stench grew thick. Not only copper blood, but an odor like rot baking in wet cloth. We gagged behind shirts, but no rags hid that smell. Then came the cries. At first we thought it wind across the timber. But by noon the water itself moaned, sounds bubbling up like voices caught in current. High wails mixed soft with low groans. Each splash rang sharp as if slaps of palms underwater. Nothing matched what nature should make. Elias, hunched by the bank, swore he heard his own name in it. "Calling me," he muttered, digging at ears. Another man, Fryer, threw down tools, shaking, said he saw hands clawing below the surface, gray fingers rising, disappearing before reach. None of us slept that night. From the bunkhouse we heard constant running. The sluice did not shut up. It rattled all hours with gurgles resembling weeping. Morning proved worse. A worker named Vince never came to breakfast. His bunk blank, boots gone, but coat behind. We found footprints down to the creek and then nothing. No return. But the sluice water ran thicker, fresh stains clinging bright against boards. The bosses planned to blast the hillside open completely, claim veins buried deep. We begged them not to. Something upstream was grave, deep, sealed, wrong. But gold outshouts reason. Charges went off. Hillside shuddered. Mud and bone tsunami surged down. Men fled the banks screaming. Among sludge came shapes unmistakable, full skeletons flattened thin, like they'd been crushed together underground for centuries. Some skulls gaped with frozen screams. One skull clung with rotted miner's helmet, brass lamp intact, as though tossed yesterday. And from the mud rose a sound I'll never forget. Laughter, not human cheer, but jagged, hateful laughter rolling across water, vibrating too long after echoes should die. The sluice was no longer ours. It belonged to whatever we'd disturbed. Part 3, the flood that never dried, approximately 480 words, after the blast. Panic ripped our crew apart. Half bolted south on foot that same day, frostbite risked rather than another hour by the creek. The rest of us huddled in camp, shaken to matchsticks, but the sluice didn't stop. Water ran steady, though it no longer looked like water. For 2 more nights it streamed pure red, every drop screaming metallic tongue. Bones continued tumbling. By torchlight we counted dozens washed out, some so fresh they still dripped black rot. There was no denying this wasn't natural soil collapse. This was graves, mass graves, torn up like wounds and fed through our line. Second night, I stood guard. Moonlight silvered creek. That's when it rose. Not flood, not mudslide figures, dozens, pale silhouettes dragging through waterway, heads lolling loose, arms swaying broken. They had no eyes, only black pits seeping cold mist. But they looked directly at me, I swear. I ran shaking to the bunkhouse. Woke men dragged them out. Of course nothing remained when they saw. Just water trickling numb. But they smelled it. Heard it, that faint sobbing weaving between splashes. The next evening sealed it. Elias himself dove in. He had been whispering for days that voices called his name from upstream. Kept saying they needed him to balance debt. We'd pulled him back from banks thrice. But final time, he slipped free, laughing hysterical, plunging chest, deep and waiting until current took him. Red swallowed him whole dot after that. Silence fell. The sluice ran clear the next morning. No more bones. No more blood. Just crisp mountain water glinting like a lyre. We dismantled that rig with haste. Hammered boards apart, burned scraps to ash. Nobody dared drink from that creek again. Some men still left. Others hardened up to finish season. But all of us carried the same question clawed raw inside. What did we unleash by cracking that hill? Winter shut camp early that year. Before we left, I walked to the sluice head. No red remained, only ripple of snowmelt. For a heartbeat I almost believed we'd imagined it. Then ice at the bank cracked faint. A bubble surfaced. Sound hissed from it, light but clear, a whisper, a scream, mixed all at once. I ran, years later. Miners still say sometimes streams turn red near Dawson after avalanches, bones tumbling like driftwood. Experts blame rust, clay flows. But I know what bleeds beneath that mountain. Gold may glitter, but rivers remember. And when water runs red, it's not ore filling your pans. It's debt. Death flowing long overdue, and sooner or later it collects every man who touched it. Blizzards are Alaska's most ruthless predators. They hunt slower than wolves, but kill surer than bullets. I never minded the dark or the cold much, but the storms, that howling white that blinds you after 2 steps, those were what kept me humble. Because once you lose your bearings in one, you may as well already be buried. It was December when I got trapped in the worst whiteout I ever knew. Our camp had been operating thin close to Skagway, pushing supplies through as daylight shrank. When we woke, skies held steel. By noon, snow hammered sideways so thick the world ceased. The bosses tried to stabilize tents, but the wind tore them like paper. Soon the only order shouted was, "Get into pairs and hold ropes." Nobody wanders alone. I was paired with the same unfortunate soul who always seemed drawn toward nightmares in these camps. We secured lines and tried to guide men to a lean-to we'd built against a rock face. Visibility was nothing. Lantern lights smeared to milk, shadows vanished. Just us and endless swirling white. That was when I heard it, a whistle, one shrill, clear note cutting straight through gale. At first I figured it was Elias yelling in his strange way, or somebody signaling direction through storm. I jerked the rope, shouted back, but Elias only stared wide, shaking his head. He hadn't whistled. Then it came again, long, pulling, a tune without words, carried steady like someone blowing across bone pipes. The sound drifted opposite of camp, deeper into the storm's throat. My stomach clenched. Alaska doesn't allow sound to travel clean in a blizzard. The wind shears it jagged. Yet that whistle slid smooth like a guiding hand. A tune that felt inviting. More men lifted heads, muttered nervous. Another whistle answered short nearby. And another. Soon the storm carried dozens, weaving songs through shrieks of wind. Elias squeezed rope hard, pale lips whispering, "They're calling." I screamed against gale, fought to drag him back. He resisted steps forward, eyes glazed. The whistle hooked him like baited line. Snow masked his boots fast. Each pace erased instantly. I hauled till my waist near split, finally rested him around. We collapsed on snow, frost in beards like glass splinters, staring wide into storm. Whistles wove louder now. Layered harmony circling closer, we couldn't tell left from right. Voices shouldn't exist in a whiteout. Yet here dozens rang, urging. Humming through ice, beckoning us further where no man returns. We staggered toward campblind, gripping rope like umbilical cord. Whistles circled sharper, cutting distinct from gale. At moments, they sounded close as a man's lips brushing my ear. At others, distant and mighty like choirs echoing across valleys. Always they came in pairs, a long note beckoning, then a shorter pitch answering near opposite direction. We saw shadows too. Shapes through snow flurries, workers moving without ropes, wandering bent but purposeful as if chasing sound. Once I swear I saw Vance, who died weeks earlier, striding half opaque through storm, shoulders dusted white, face slack but whistling bright, Elias clamped knuckles white on rope. I dragged him along, boots sinking knee deep. My beard ice stiff, lungs clawed with razor air. Yet my ears burned with unnatural clarity, because the whistles weren't mere notes. They turned into melodies. Simple tunes, almost lullabies, familiar, my grandmother used to hum near her lamp. Now it whistled around me clear as glass panes, urging me step forward into storm's embrace. Temptation pressed harder than cold. Your body longs for light and darkness, warmth and frost. But here they offered comfort in possible voices, promising safety if you just follow closer. That's why men vanish in storms. Not lost, called, later I learned 3 workers did vanish outright that night. Their ropes unclipped, knots loose not from frozen hands but from deliberate untying, as though they freed themselves willingly to follow. Sound into white, dot at one point, Elias stopped dead, gaze glassy. He muttered that his mother was whistling. Tears streamed and froze on his cheeks. He reached to unclip rope. My fist caught him across jaw, knocked him back, because I knew if I let go he'd vanish faster than straw and fire. He shrieked at me, cursed, said I robbed him of last comfort. Yet minutes later, when a low figure emerged ahead clearly not one of ours, he realized I'd saved his soul because the thing whistling stepped wrong. Its gait bent, spine arched, legs bowing unnatural. It didn't walk through storm but moved with it, snow parting away unnatural. Face I'll never forget, hollow sockets where eyes had shriveled, lips black split, cheeks stretched thin. Yet, when it leaned close, notes poured steady from throat without touch of lips. A sound produced not by air but by emptiness vibrating. We froze petrified, breath choking. It tilted head bird-like, listening. Then another answered behind us in duet. We were surrounded. I'll never know what gave us strength then. Maybe adrenaline, maybe sheer hate of whatever tried to seduce us. But I wrenched Elias up, shoved him ahead, and we clawed back along rope blind to all else. The whistling crescendoed into fever pitch-long shrills, answered rapid, weaving lattice of song around us. They tried to drive us mad, shapes flitted parallel, moving along snow walls, half seen. Mouthless faces contorted, throats bulging vibrating tones. Closer, closer. Elias lost it halfway. He dropped knees, covering ears, screaming silent. I tightened grip around rope, dragging him bodily until my chest seared raw. Fingers cracked blood, frozen leather cutting skin. Every note promised relief if I stopped. Body screamed to rest. Then dim lantern glow. Faint halo smearing through storm. I lunged desperate, yanked Elias beneath canvas lean-to. Seconds later the rope inside whipped taut violently, like many hands jerked it back. Then slack. Outside whistles faded as if nothing but howling. Wind had ever been. We survived. Barely. Of those who marched out that morning 15 strong, only 11 stumbled back. 4 sets of ropes ended loose, trailing empty across snow, clips undone with deliberate care. None seen again. By spring thaw their corpses never surfaced. In aftermath, Elias wouldn't speak. He sat shell-hollow eyes, flinching at slightest whistle, even tea-kettle steam. Within months he wandered off mid-shift. We never recovered him. Some whispered next storm he followed sound final. I still work camps years later, but storms ruin me. Each time wind shrieks across canvas I stiffen, pulse rattling, ears searching for tones I pray won't come. But too often they do. Low whistle curling unnatural through gust. Carrying tunes familiar impossible. I've learned since that locals have lore spirits of unburied miners trapped in ice, seeking to swell their numbers. They snare wanderers with beloved sounds. Not one tribe denies it, though each names them different. Storm callers, the hollow whistlers. White deaths, I call them what they are, hunters, because once snow blinds you, sight betrays. And when hearing sweet calls, your instincts betray too. They'll make you walk gladly into frost grave. When it happens again, and it will, I'll tie rope twice. I'll bind myself lashes deep, but I don't lie to myself. Every man has a note prepared for him, some tune from heart they can't refuse. Mine will come one night. A whistle slipping between rafters like my grandmother's lullaby, familiar, gentle. I'll grit teeth, shut eyes. But maybe I'll step anyway, because in a whiteout, once the whistles begin, no man truly escapes. You learn to recognize every face in a winter camp. When the wind howls outside and snow buries men whole if they wander too long, familiarity is survival. That's why the first time I saw the man in the blue parka, I knew something was wrong. It was a stormy January evening at our claim near Keno Hill. Whiteout winds howled across canvas bunks. Lanterns hissed inside, and most of us were hunched over coffee rations. I stepped out to relieve myself against the snowbank, breath crystallizing instantly. That's when I spotted him. A shape trudged along the far perimeter of camp. Steady, purposeful. His parka shone blue, bright blue, like fresh-dyed cloth, odd amid our bleached gear patched with fur. Hood pulled tight, goggles black. He didn't stumble like men do in drifts. He moved smooth, deliberate. I waved, though every instinct tensed hard. "Hey, you lost?" No answer, just a nodless, slow turn of head before he passed beyond light. When I mentioned it inside, most shrugged. Probably a hunter. Maybe even one of our own mistaken in the dark. But the foreman stiffened. Sod, nobody wears blue out here. I knew he was right. All our issued gear was brown sheepskin or black quilt. None blue. The next night, the blue figure appeared again, this time closer, pacing the cook tent perimeter. Elias claimed he heard crunching boots right outside the canvas flap. When he peeked, snow held tracks all right, neat, clean, deep, but they looped in circles without direction. We tried convincing ourselves some trapper was wandering lost. But there were no remote villages within 50 miles. No trails connected here. Who could possibly hike clear into our isolated claim, alone in weather that froze animals where they stood? And then his appearances multiplied. Each night we'd spot that hooded parka at edges, sometimes leaning near machinery, sometimes simply standing in white like a scarecrow waiting. The worst was when Vince swore he woke one night to the sound of breathing above his cot. Flipping his lantern, he glimpsed a blue cloth sleeve vanish through wallboards without the wall breaking. We demanded he was dreaming, but tracks outside bunkhouse confirmed it wasn't imagination. The man wasn't stranded. He wasn't human in any sense we knew, and he hadn't come to share coffee. He had come circling like a Volf. Work continued despite dread. Miners' no fear doesn't stop bosses itching for ounce of gold. We dragged ourselves each dawn back into shafts, setting charges, hammering stone. Yet, even as drills echoed underground, men kept glancing back at tunnel mouths. Everyone waited to see blue parka framed in snow. It escalated during one collapse. We were clearing shaft 6 late. Timber supports had warped, permafrost cracking. I was half a tunnel deep hammering when the groan erupted. Boards snapped like twigs. Dust storm filled shaft. Lights swung down. Rocks caved fast. I bolted with Elias scraping close behind. In that suffocating chaos, I swore I glimpsed movement not mine. A figure in blue stood perfectly still amid falling beams. Debris crushed all around but didn't touch him. Snow burst from walls, choking me blind, but through dust, that parka glowed. He raised a gloved hand. The collapse raged around him like water splitting around rock. When daylight hit again, 5 men hadn't crawled out. The collapse buried them clean. We dug 12 hours after, splitting hands, raw nothing. Too deep, lost, yet I swear to my God, I saw those men again that night. They crouched outside campfire ring beyond snowdrift void. Shapes 5 clear, huddled tight, parka hoods raised unfamiliar. When lantern light brushed, faces reflected pale, hollow, mouths open in identical half-smile. And looming behind them at center him, the blue parka, Elias broke down then, screaming curses at the figure as if it was his fault. But foreman near strangled him silent, terrified to draw its gaze. Over weeks, more collapses and accidents piled. With each, the man resurfaced, looming always at perimeter, watching like a ledger master noting his next entry. Every death seemed shadowed by that blue cloth glimmering unnatural under snow moonlight. Then strange things started in camp. Cots frozen stiff to walls each morning. Coffee in pots turned black sludge though poured fresh. Voices echoing with blue parka behind them when men spoke. The longer we stayed, the stronger he bound himself around our camp. By February, most refused tunnels. Even bosses muttered uneasy truths. It wasn't just bad luck. Something had joined us since collapse. Something wearing colors no sane man wore north, a presence that walked like a man and yet was never human. One night sealed the toll. Foreman finally gave in, calling camp off, preparing early retreat. We packed sleds by dim moonstorm pending. That's when he came full into camp. Not circling perimeter, not shadows. Full presence. He walked right between cook tent and bunks while every man froze. Lanterns flickered, breaths locked. Blue cloth near gleamed electric. Goggles opaque, snow crust gathering on him like he shed frost itself. He never spoke. He never raised weapon. Just moved past each of us, head tilting slightly side to side as if counting. When he reached end of line, he stopped beside empty sled, traces one we'd yet to hitch. He turned square, lifted hand once, and then vanished into swirl of snow like mist unwinding. That was last any of us saw him physically. But by sunrise, one sled team refused to move. Animals screaming, eyes rolled white until they died straight in harness with blood foam on snow. We left them. And later that morning, Elias stepped aside mid-march, smiling faint like a sleepwalker, and walked directly into storm. No amount of yelling made him slow. His tracks filled instantly. Gone. Men whispered the blue parka chose his price before letting camp free. One lamb always traded for passage. Elias became that weight. We staggered out days later, broken husks. Nobody returned for gear. Nobody reopened shaft. In town, when we mumbled story half-drunk, older locals only nodded. One said, he walks every winter. Sometimes green, sometimes blue. Always color meant to draw eyes. Always watching collapses. No folklore written. Just oral nods. Everyone close to claims had glimpsed him once. I never mind same way again. Even south, years later, when snowstorms roll in, I watch horizon for flick of blue. Sometimes in crowds I glimpse it, a jacket flash in window reflection. Gone when I turn. And I know truth hard as ore. Some spirits claim tunnels as their own. They circle camps, waiting not for wealth but for death. The man in the blue parka is one of them. Witnessed too many collapses, collect too many lost. He doesn't howl like storm houses. Doesn't scream like permafrost graves. He just stands quiet, marking tallies. He puts himself among us until one soul follows willingly back, and then he vanishes, waiting for next winter, next collapse, next tally, but he never leaves for good. Because once you've seen him, whether you live or not, he's recorded you already, and all I can do is keep praying my line on his list hasn't come due yet. There are many kinds of cold in Alaska, but the kind that burns worst is the cold underground. Even with lamps flickering and bodies sweating from the labor, the moment you cut into deep frozen earth, your bones feel frost centuries old. That's why when I felt warmth in shaft 12, true warmth, I knew something wasn't right. We set up outside Nome late winter. Working an abandoned shaft line collapsed since 1912. Old records claimed it closed, after an accident involving trapped gas and cave-ins, and most locals shook heads, said it should have stayed buried. But bosses saw forgotten shafts as shortcuts. They sent us prying open timbers, frost rigid and laced with rot. The first day's nothing but bitter ice. Sparks froze before hitting ground. Picks chipped walls so hard my palms split. But one evening, as our lamps dimmed and air grew tight, I felt a strange heat dripping from deeper inside. Not light heat. I thought I'd lost my senses. But moments later, a draft gusted out from the tunnel mouth, warm, carrying odor like charred pitch, mixed with iron. Others halted swings, faces turning. Breath fog evaporated against it instead of freezing. "What's keeping fire alive down there?" Jared muttered. No one answered. Deep shafts don't keep fire. They suffocate them. We ventured deeper days later despite instinct's blistering alarms. At 80 feet, walls shimmered faint orange, though no lamp bent that color. Rock crust licked black like smoke, scorched, though layers above stayed clean. Some patches glowed faint, not ember, not coal. Stone itself. Elias swore he saw flame twisting in air, rising 5 feet, then vanishing. The older crew claimed trick of lantern fume. But I worked long enough to know mirages don't pump heat that singes beards. What hit harder? The sounds. Every hour shafts groaned. Then low rumbles echoed like distant furnaces. Once I swore I heard human screams carried through stone, but muffled, trapped far below. The bosses grinned wide as though veins of gold heated themselves, ripe for taking. They ordered blasting charges weeks earlier than safe. We obeyed, hands sweating, not from labor, but dread, and that's the night we unleashed the fire properly. The hidden fire that had slept. Sealed over 100 years, I'll never shake. Images from that blast night. We primed 4 sticks. Set them against new vein wall, retreated safety. Detonations rocked shaft into thunderclap. Debris rolled, dust clouded thick. For minutes silence ruled, then the roaring came, but not collapse. Not cave in. Roaring like fire come alive. Heat surged down shaft strong enough to cook breath. Dust blew back glowing orange, swirling bright as sparks. Shouts rang men choking, covering eyes as flames slithered along walls without wood to feed on. Liquid fire crawled across stone like serpents. Oil pocket. Foreman screamed. But no oil burns without smoke. What rushed wasn't choking, fumes just heat so pure my lashes curled, shapes flickered within. Some men gasped. They saw shadows moving inside flames, miners, dozens, screaming but unburned, locked in sliding walls. I glimpsed one clear, a bearded man clawing at rock while fire coiled from his mouth like tongue. He stretched toward us, begging without words, then snapped back into searing glow. We fled toward surface, choking tears. But 2 didn't make it, held back by collapse or something worse. Their shrieks joined fiery chorus echoing behind, outside. Snow melted in half-moon ring around shaft mouth, streaming vapor. Fire belched upward, not as smoke, but hellish light. Orange tongues whipped skyward, silent as aurora. Frost around mine blackened, never returning to snow again. That night, even miles away, villagers reported skies pulsing orange above ridge. They thought forest fire bloomed midwinter. But no forest burned. Only shaft 12, still bosses refused close. Natural gas vein, they insisted. Promised fortune. Forced us back next day. Against all sense we descended again. Deep inside, fire glowed gentler, but never died. Walls stayed hot enough to blister palms. Lanterns useless against that eternal flame. And within whispers rose. Like crackling coals but formed into words, some voices cursed, others begged. Some shrieked long like tortured metal pipes. Every flame pulse carried echoes distinct as human throats swallowed long ago. One man fell to knees sobbing, clutching ears to shut them. He swore one voice was his brother died decades earlier up north. Nobody believed until lines of flame twisted together forming crude outline of a man. Stepping toward him, we dragged him screaming out before fire reached. His arms blistered clean where flame licked despite no contact. From then, none doubted we hadn't found fuel trapped underground. We'd found prison fire heat chewing time itself, never ceasing. And something inside it wanted company. We lasted 3 days longer before abandoning. Not from lack of courage, but from sheer unnatural torment. Every descent mocked human sense. Frost walls dripped constant melt despite -20 outside. Flames danced independent from physics, licking air without consuming oxygen. Whispers merged into lyrics, chants echoing languages unknown. We started hearing fiery heartbeats, steady thumping timed with furnace bursts. As if shaft itself bred lungs and pulse, men collapsed trembling. More than one swore dreams carried burning figures pacing edges of camp at night, their parka hoods glowing from within. I woke once with smell of smoke-choking lungs despite nothing lit nearby. When I ran outside, shaft belched upward faint flame jets. Twisting like hands clawing sky, the foreman tried final experiment, lower weighted cage to depth never reached. Winch screeched down 100 feet. 200. Then cable jerked taut. When hauled back, cage returned partially melted iron drooping as wax. Inside metal warped. Impressions gouged sharp that looked too much like fingerprints clawing bars, that broke remaining resolve. Even bosses fell silent pale. Nobody dared another attempt. But fire punished anyway. Elias, weakest heart among us, wandered ragged near shaft edge mumbling confessions. Next blink he pitched into opening, no scream swallowed. Shaft roared louder instantly. Flame rose glorious like satisfied beast we left next dawn. Left equipment, gold dreams, all. We snow tramped 30 miles half-starved just to reach outpost. Behind us, glow still pulsed through snow horizon like lighthouse beacon. Locals refused hearing details. Only muttered curses about curse shaft, the fire below, told in hush before children. They claimed in 1912 miners died trapped in explosion. Bodies unrecovered, believed entombed. But their souls had burned ever since fused into fire never quenched. Their pain boiled time into eternal prison. By reopening we'd only stirred embers, I pray never see it again. But some nights I fear I will. Because in silence I still hear crackling words scorch my dreams, promising more fire yet to claim me. My blanket heat sudden though, hearths cold. Lips dry, lungs raw as if breathing smoke unseen. Fire wants company. Shaft breathes hunger. Mark my testimony. If travelers speak of everlasting flame shaft near Nome, steer clear. No fortune's worth heat of suffering unending. Stones may glitter, gold may spill, but beneath earth's frozen skin lies furnace holding dam. And if you lean too close, listen to hard voices inside flame sing welcome loud, patient forever. They don't want rescued.